Hello everyone, my name is Selee, and today I'm going to be talking about work that I conducted for my master's thesis under my advisor, Dr. Mankato, conducted at Minnesota State University, Mankato. And my project was called The Biogeography of Functional Traits and Bioregimes in Oak Species Quercus across the United States. My name is Selee. So I first wanted to start off my discussion today by talking about why is this important? Why should we care about wildfires, even if we don't live in an area that experiences frequent wildfire? So here in Minnesota this summer, this is a picture of the Twin Cities area, and that's not a filter on this image. It is the smog from the wildfires occurring up in Canada, and this was our daily reality this summer, having really poor air quality index that impacted our everyday life. So again, with many things climate change related, it's multifaceted, the issue, and we will see compounding impacts of wildfires, even if you don't live in an area that experiences fire itself. The more related to why this study is important to use oaks, why we utilized oaks. Oaks are known as ecosystem engineers, meaning their structure within an ecosystem helps to shape and structure that ecosystem and drastically changes it, which is important when thinking about flammability. Another reason that's important, a study by Bears 2018 showing the proportion of tree biomass in the United States, with Quercus coming in at #1. So they make up a large amount of our forest, thus they're likely pretty important species to be aware of. Another reason is oaks support biodiversity. So a researcher named Doug Talmy at the University of Delaware wrote a book about native oak species, and he found that on just one oak species, up to 500 caterpillars existed, and native ones. And obviously that brings in more insects and other birds and other mammals, and helps to just support the overall diversity within the forest. Next, we shift to fire patterns. So shifting fire patterns occurring with a more frequent fire pattern. So the frequency is increasing, so that time between fire. And with that, the severities levels we're seeing shift. So now fires are more intense when they do occur, meaning that that spread is more, it's going to burn more acreages and cause more damage. And then lastly, oak fire resistance has not been mapped at the scale that we present here in the study, so novel in that aspect. So I just want to start off again. I don't know everyone's background here today, so I want to start off about why Quercus is a great study species that we utilized. So the diversity and range that the clade possess is very vast, with it expanding over 5 different continents with over 435 distinct species. In the US alone, we have 92 oak species, 30 of those existing in the growth form of shrub, which I'll talk about a little bit later on. But here I have a map from Biota of North America program, or GONAP maps, and showing the native oak species richness. As we get into those darker colors, richness increasing. So 20 to 29 native species. So we see a lot of native oak diversity across the southeastern United States, as well as into California and the southwestern United States. But overall, a lot of diversity spanning across varying ecosystems in the US. And maybe not surprisingly, if you're going to exist in so many varying ecosystems, like the clade of Quercus does, you're going to have to possess a range of functional traits to be able to survive in such environments. So again, don't know everyone's background, so you might have an idea of what an oak leaf looks like in your head, but that should be challenged by what I present here today if you don't know much about the clade. So here are two oak species, Quercus gradifolia and Quercus kelloggi, both California oaks. And here we can just visually see some very different leaf morphology traits that they possess. So Quercus gradifolia a lot smaller and thicker, whereas kelloggi is a lot has a larger leaf area. And with that, they also possess different growth forms. So I was mentioning earlier, of the 92 US species, 30 are in the growth form of shrub, which is shown by Quercus vertifolia, for example. So a shrub species is a species that's not going to grow much higher than about 9 meters in its mature plant height in its lifetime, and likely will be even shorter than that, with this species getting to about 2 to 3 meters in height at mature plant height. But there's also many oaks that possess the growth form, like Quercus tilapia, shown as a tree growth form. Again, just want to highlight the variation that we see just across this plate. So if you're going to exist across so many different continents and possess so many ranging traits to be able to exist in varying environments, you likely are doing something evolutionarily successful as this. And we do see that within Quercus. So again, just want to highlight that range we see just across leaf morphology, of some very lobed leaves to serrated leaves to be more elongated and smooth leaves. And I also have shown here the radiation of the different sections of oak into the United States, or into rather North America. So around 40 million years ago, common ancestor came over from Eurasia into northern Canada, and then these migrated down over millions of years. So we have the red shown, the red lineage of oaks shown in red, the white shown in white, diverging down, splitting off across the Rocky Mountains, or a little bit above there, into the western and eastern United States. In the southern United States, in green, we have the live oaks, and then in California specifically, we have the golden cup oaks, shown in gold. So again, within our study, we're able to represent these varying sections of oaks as well. So today during my talk, I'm going to mention the term fire resistance quite a lot. So I want to get everyone familiar with this term. So to start off, my research focus is to use this model clade of Quercus to be able to develop a functional trait biogeography. So be able to look at the variation of traits that we see within this clade, be able to spatially map it across the US. And we want to do this and frame the traits that we select in terms of their fire resistance, or this ability to be able to survive, to have mature plants survive surface fire. And what I mean by surface fire is just fire that's above the surface of the plant. So these traits help to promote survival within the species. So now moving into the traits that we ended up selecting, so our trait methodology that we used. So we selected 7 traits that related to the overall fire resistance score index that we created for this study. And these traits were selected based on previous studies, specifically one by Stevens et al. 2020 that was done using Western conifer species, differentiate that they had selected, as well as research in the literature review to select the following traits. So 3 relating to tree morphology of mature plant height, bark thickness, and self-pruning. 2 relating to leaf morphology of specific leaf area and leaf habit. And then lastly, 2 relating to flammability of flame height and flame duration. This data was gathered using herbarium data sets, as well as literature reviews, and through data collection out in the field. So I'm just showing some of that data collection that I got a couple summers ago at UC Davis Arboretum and Morton Arboretum. And this was just some of my pictures from that time. And I found this to be very valuable, not only to be able to collect some of those missing data points, but also for me to get a good understanding of this variation within the clade of Quercus, besides just looking at it online or in a textbook. So I just briefly want to go over these 7 traits and how they would relate to fire resistance. So the first one being the oak mature plant height, which we hope to fill in some of those gaps also with data collection out in the field, but also using the fire effects information system. So mature plant height, pretty self-explanatory. The mature height that the plant will grow to in its lifetime, and just measured. So something like a tree would be of higher fire resistance because of that ability to be able to avoid the fire simply, versus something like a shrub species is not going to be able to do much of avoiding it if fire is to come through. So that is more related to lower fire resistance in our measure. Next, we have bark thickness. So I was able to collect bark thickness for 52 different species of oaks through this study. So that was very valuable to be able to add that to the literature. And it's pretty well understood in fire ecology that the thicker the bark a plant possesses, that the more likely the plant is able to survive that surface fire, because the fire is not able to get into the inner cambium of the tree, the living tissues, to result in early mortality. So thicker bark equals higher fire resistance versus a thinner bark denoting lower fire resistance. Next, the trait of self-pruning. So here I just have a picture shown of a species of oak, and the degree at which the lower limbs are pruned from the tree itself. So the idea being that the higher degree of self-pruning, so having less of those limbs close to the ground, is going to denote higher fire resistance, because the fire won't be able to climb into the crown of the tree and scorch it, or the plant rather. And then lower fire resistance being a degree of low self-pruning. So having more limbs closer to the ground, fire is going to be able to climb up into the ground. Next, moving on to the leaf morphology traits of specific leaf area and leaf habit. So specifically here is that one-sided area of the fresh leaf divided by that dried mass. And then the leaf habit possessed by oaks being evergreen, brevideciduous, or deciduous. And evergreen meaning that the species will hold on to its leaves year-round. Brevideciduous, it is highly dependent upon environmental variables. And then lastly, deciduous, dropping those leaves seasonally. So here I just wanted to highlight two species and how they would relate to that fire resistance score. So Quercus agrifolia and Quercus montana. So Quercus agrifolia has that lower specific leaf area, and then it's an evergreen leaf habit. So that would be of higher fire resistance because it's going to be holding on to those leaves, versus Quercus montana that has a higher specific leaf area and is deciduous in leaf habit. So it is denoted lower fire resistance because these leaves will be dropping, adding more fuels to the forest floor. We're also interested in how those leaf morphology traits then impacts the flammability of a species. So we looked at the flame height and flame duration for our leaf litter flammability traits. We were able to collect leaf litter for 34 oak species in this study through the arboretum sampling, as well as people sending leaves to us to go ahead and burn, conduct these burn trials on. So this is an image of one of the burn trials that I conducted, and in relation to the traits of fire resistance, you see that a longer flame height, but the shorter flame duration denotes higher fire resistance. So this idea being that the higher that flame is, the more energy expended in that climbing of that flame height, the shorter duration of the burn. In the inverse, we have a species from another one of my burn trials of Quercus with a very short flame height, and the idea being a shorter flame height and a longer burn duration. It's going to be a lower fire resistance because it's going to burn for longer, potentially spread, and also burn hotter, potentially. So now that gets us to the functional trait ranking system that we created in this study. So we have our 7 traits, but they were added up differently. So we took the traits, standardized them, averaged them to then assign a fire resistance score from 0 to 1. 0 meaning low fire resistance, so the species possesses traits that do not promote that above ground survival, versus a fire resistance score of 1. Species possesses traits conducive with that higher fire resistance, having traits that promote that survival. So we used height, self-pruning, and bark thickness scores we combined our leaf morphology traits into one score and averaged that. And then we took, we found that our flammability data was highly correlated of the flame height and duration. So we used a principal component analysis to combine that and use that as our one score to then average out those 5 traits. So then we used a model fit and analyzed it using a stepwise AKI information criterion. And through doing this, we were able to determine what traits added well to our overall fire resistance score versus ones that needed to be removed in this process. So I just wanted to kind of highlight an example then of what this looks like. So here we have the example of Quercus coccinea, which is shown its distribution across the southeastern United States. And so we have the following 7 traits, 5 scores: so plant height, self-pruning, bark thickness, specific leaf area and leaf habit, and then those flame duration principal component. And so we took all 5 values, averaged that out, and this received a fire resistance score of 0.56. So in a rather intermediate to high fire resistance score. So then we went ahead and applied these rankings to the 81 species that we were able to have data on in the United States. And we also then have those species highlighted in green are our 38 species that we use in our forest inventory analysis mapping analysis. So we have the fire resistance scores shown low end here to the higher end. And this was kind of just the natural breakdown that occurred, these different color sections that we saw. And we see that the first grouping being for fire resistant trees, so they possessed higher scores, all with the growth form of the tree. The next group being more fire associated short trees. The next group, fire sensitive short trees and shrubs, growth forms in this grouping. And then lastly, all the subalpine, arid, and barren shrubs were in that lower scoring of fire resistance. We kind of just saw this natural breakdown in our fire resistance scores. So now, moving on to the fire portion. So we utilize Landfire, which is a government agency with the U.S. Forest Service and the Department of Agriculture. And Landfire has created this map that I have shown here of the fire regime groups. So we have 5 fire regime groups across the United States, and they vary depending on the frequency and years that fire is occurring, as well as the severity of that fire. So now looking at that a little bit closer, so these fire regime groups are again fire activity that is in an area over a long period of time, classified by that frequency in years, the severity of fire, the different fuel types, and the size distribution of those fires. So we also use another Landfire product called fire return intervals, which is also that level of fire return, that frequency in which fire is occurring. So we see in fire regime group 1, fires happening pretty frequently every 0 to 35 years with a low to mid severity when it does occur, intensity-wise. In comparison to fire regime group 5, fires occurring every 200 plus years. So fire is not occurring frequently, and if it is to occur, the severity level is going to be a replacement fire, meaning the whole stand of trees will be replaced in the process, or it says any severity, meaning that this is heavily dependent on the fuel load, the last time it was burned in that area, many variables. So that leads us to the research questions that we need to answer. Will oak species that evolved within those same fire regime groups have similar fire resistance scores? So again, the idea being that if an oak is residing within that fire regime group 1, has been exposed to a fire return interval and an intensity level that has resulted in frequent fire, and what that environment then is going to filter and select for traits that aid in that fire resistance or that survival of above ground biomass. And then our second one, will oak species share a suite of similar functional traits that relate to their fire-resistant scores? So is there more than one way to be a fire-resistant oak? Do you have to have thick bark? Is it more about flammability of the leaf litter or leaf traits? What factors yield high fire resistance scores? Now moving on to our mapping methodology. So all of our mapping methods were done using ArcGIS Pro, and we used available forest inventory analysis data from the US Forest Service. So I'm just highlighting what the map of the above ground live biomass from this US Forest Service forest inventory analysis data set. And this is a data set from private and public lands. They use actually going out into the plots and sampling the communities to see what the age classes and what species comprise the community, as well as using remotely sensed satellite data to conduct this. So first, we wanted to identify our study area where oaks comprise at least 1/3 of that community's assembly. We decided on this 1/3 value because we wanted to be sure to include more shrubland oak areas where the overall biomass of trees might be a little bit lower because of these types of environments. So we took the 38 forest inventory analysis oaks total basal area per pixel and then divided that by all forest inventory analysis species total basal area per pixel. And then we selected areas that were greater than 1/3. So then moving forward, all analysis used this 1/3 oak study area. We also then wanted to determine what each species' individual fire resistance score was to be able to determine the community weighted fire resistance score of an area. So I have this visual for an example here. Because some areas might only have one oak species present, but what would it look like if you had 3 present within one area? How would that community's fire resistance score yield a better idea of the overall fire resistance? So we have species number 1 basal area, we multiplied it by that assigned score. Did the same with species number 2 basal area times the fire resistance score. Did that with 3, 4, and so on for all 38 layers, and then divided that by all oak species combined basal area to be able to determine that community weighted score. So then, using that community weighted fire resistance score, we could further analyze those land fire layers of fire regime groups and fire return interval for our study area. We used a generalized linear model fit to do so. Because we had a very large data set, even of that 1/3 study area of oaks to work with, we did end up using a random 1% selection of the fire resistance score pixel data points to sample for our analysis. And then we also wanted to determine where there were areas of fire return intervals in the fire resistance scores did not match up or there were mismatches, in other words. And I'll explain that a little bit more in depth when I get to it. We also conducted some phylogenetic analyses on our fire resistance scores. So we wanted to examine how the clade of Quercus was adapting to this fire return interval with those fire resistance scores that we assigned. We did this using a phylogenetic generalized least squares test. We also wanted to see if there were any unexpected phylogenetic shifts that could not just be explained giving evolutionary time. We did this to see if the different sections of clade of Quercus were adapting differently with those fire-resistant traits. And we did this using an ancestral character state reconstruction, phylogenetic EM expectation maximalization. And all our analyses used the HIP et al. 2020 phylogeny shown over there, and were conducted in R. So now moving on to the results. So here are the results of our community weighted fire resistance scores of those 38 forest inventory analysis of species shown. And on the high end, our highest score was assigned a 0.75 to Quercus bicolor or the white swamp oak. And then the, which you're seeing in this northern kind of part in Minnesota is found. Then the lowest score was assigned a 0.17. That was to the shrub growth form of Quercus minima, which is present within the Gulf Coast area within the south into Florida as well. So this community weighted map, we have again the higher fire resistance being shown in the red and this orange. So we see that across the eastern United States, as well as into California, we have rather high fire resistance scores. But then these lower values shown in yellow, we see some yellow pockets scattered throughout the eastern United States, as well as California, with a notable section of lower fire resistance scores across the southwestern United States. And then lastly, the lighter blue areas of scores less than 0.31 lower. We see a lot of that within the southwestern United States as well. So here is the 38 forest return analysis of species within those fire return intervals. So this is showing again that 1/3 study area where oaks make up at least 1/3, and we have the fire return in so this is the darker areas. Fire is happening more frequently, that return interval. As we get in warmer colors of orange to yellow, in that orange area, every 100 years, upwards to 300 years in the colored yellow. Then we took just that 1% selection of this overall study area to give us these results of our fire return interval on our X. So as the fire return interval is increasing, we see on our Y that our fire resistance scores of those community weighted values are decreasing ever so slightly. So we see a negative slope occurring. And this would be what we would expect to occur, given that the more frequent interval of fire that environment is exposed to is going to then be filtering for more fire resistant traits, resulting in higher fire resistant scores. And so we did see that a slight decrease. So next is the 38 forest inventory analysis of species within the fire regime groups. So each fire regime group shown here, 1 through 5, and again, that is that 1/3 study area of the United States. And these fire regime groups classified again by the frequency in years that fire is occurring and then that severity level of fire. So we took again a 1% selection of a random selection of this study area to further analyze our community weighted fire resistance scores with their fire regime groups that they occurred within. That gave us these results here. So on our X, we have those fire regime groups 1 through 5. And then on our Y, we have that fire resistance score, that community weighted value shown here. So our highest, or we do see that there's significant difference between all 5 fire regime groups, and that our highest fire resistance score average was a mean of 0.55 in fire regime group 2, which you would expect that group 1 and 2 should have those higher fire resistance scores because of, again, of that frequency selection pressure. We do see that fire regime group 1 does have the next highest with 0.54, but it does share that mean value with fire regime group 5, which is not what you would expect given that fire regime group 5 fire return interval is every 200 plus years. So again, it's not being exposed to that frequent fire, but this is likely explained to the fact that our highest score was given to Quercus bicolor, which is the white swamp oak, and that is primarily existing within that fire regime group 5. So that likely bumped up the fire resistance score average for that group. We do see that Fire regime group 4 has the lowest at 0.47, and then fire regime group 3, which again is expected given that longer interval and of fire return. But another thing worth pointing out is the differences between points within each group. Again, this should be pretty indicative of the overall study area because it was this random 1% selection, but it's worth highlighting that most oaks are existing within that fire regime group 1. So then I also wanted to highlight any mismatches between that fire resistance score and the fire return interval. So I did this by in ArcMap or ArcGIS Pro, I did some natural breaks of our fire resistance scores to be able to determine where the high end, so the resistant end existed, and then that sensitive end, and used those fire resistance scores for that threshold. And then for the fire return, I used the following distinctions. So for sensitive frequent fire was defined as every 1 to 20 years with a fire resistance score of less than or equal to 0.46, shown in the magenta color. The next grouping being the sensitive intermediate, so intermediate fire happening every 41 to 150 years, with a fire resistance score less than or equal to 0.46, shown in orange. The next classification of resistance now being resistant intermediate, so same intermediate fire every 41 to 150 years with a fire resistance score that is greater than or equal to 0.60, shown in green. And then lastly, the resistant infrequent, so infrequent fire every 151 to 300 years fire is occurring with a fire resistance score greater than or equal to 0.06, shown in that light blue color. So I want to just zoom in closer to that map shown here. So you see the sensitive highlighted areas are shown in red and orange, where the resistant areas are highlighted in dark green and the light blue. So these areas of sensitivity, we see pockets throughout the United States. So some up in the Northeast, some along this coastal southern band into Florida, and then these pockets throughout Texas in the center of the United States, as well as scatterings across the southwestern United States. So it's worth mentioning that these species may be in areas, again, they're in areas that have frequent fire, so every 1 to 20 years, but the scores are rather low. But they may be just due to the fact these are more shrub growth form species. So shrubs may be selecting more for a strategy of fire embracer compared to fire resistance. So this might just be more of a difference in strategy shown by shrub species. Not necessarily saying that if fire is to come through these areas that shrubs just have different ways of surviving fire. So shrubs focus a lot more on below ground survival after a fire event. So not that above ground survival of fire resistance. That might just be those pink areas of highlight of sensitivity. As far as the orange areas of sensitive intermediate, so again, this is areas where fire is happening every 41 to 150 years, and these had low scores of 0.046 or lower. We see a huge amount of this orange across the southwestern United States. And again, this is not as reflective of only shrub growth form. This also has trees in this area, and it may just be these species are existing in more less resource-rich environments to not be able to select for those higher fire-resistant scores that we see in other parts. But this might be an area or areas of communities of concern in the future, especially if that fire return interval is to ramp up and become more close to that 41 years compared to the 150 years. Also an area of concern due to drought. So with increased drought, potentially this area could be even more impacted by that increased frequency in fire. So next I want to highlight those resistant areas. So we have the resistant in green, We have a lot of that in the northern United States, as well as in this southern band. And again, these species just have higher fire resistance scores, even though they're not being exposed to that interval of fire that's very frequent, meaning that if the fire return interval were to increase in these areas, they might do quite well. These communities might be well adapted. And then lastly, the resistant infrequent, we have a lot shown within the southern and into Florida. Again, these species, fire is not happening frequently, every 150 to 300 years. So these species just might be, again, existing in those resource-rich environments, be able to select for more fire-resistant traits, and this might be an area that will do well, or the communities will be successful if that fire return interval were to increase. Now moving on to the flammability data. So I was able to gather some flammability data that I conducted burn trials for, and I used outlines of methods outlined by Fonda 2001, as well as these other species did, or these other studies did. And I ended up adding all this data from previous studies as well as mine to determine that there is a correlation between that average flame duration and the average maximum flame height. So my results show significant correlation between these two, as the other studies did. So as again, that average flame duration is increasing, we see that that maximum flame height is decreasing. So now moving on to those phylogenetic results from our phylogenetic generalized least squares analyses. So we conducted then looking at the median fire return interval. Now, not that community weighted value for each species, but the individual species fire resistance scores. So we do see that, contrary to the previous findings that of the community weighted scores of fire resistance, see that as this median fire return on X is increasing, we slightly see this increase in our slope on our fire resistance scores. We see a significant pattern of increase as that fire return interval gets longer, which is not what we would expect, especially looking at something like this species. But this may just point to a high phylogenetic overdispersion occurring within the clade of Quercus. So other studies have also found this. So Bears 2019 looks at different sections of oaks, the reds and the whites, and they're doing different things. So even members within the same sections are behaving and maybe selecting for traits very differently, varying on the environments in which they inhabit. So some are inhabiting more fire-prone environments, versus some are in more mesic conditions, even though they're closely related. And to highlight this species all the way up here, so not having a very high return interval of fire, but the score it has is quite high in terms of fire resistance. Now this might just be that this species exists within an environment that has readily available resources, and is able to just grow tall and able to, this environment selecting for traits that are conducive with fire resistance, but we can't necessarily determine that it is from fire resistance if it's not being exposed to fire within its environment. But then we also constructed that ancestral character state reconstruction for our phylogeny of the US Quercus species. So here we have that fire resistance shown across the bars. So higher fire resistance shown in red, and then lower fire resistance shown in blue, with the intermediate fire resistance in a green color. And then on the side, we have these bars denoting growth form. So the purple being tree growth form, and the orange being shrub growth form. So we also have highlighted the different sections of oak that exist within the United States, of the red, the golden cup, the live, and the white oak sections, with where they reside on phylogeny. So specifically looking at just the white oaks right now, we see again that Quercus bicolor and Quercus lyrata, so bicolor, very dark red, so lyrata is green. They're doing quite different things, fire resistance wise, and selecting for these different traits. So again, a lot of niche partitioning going on. Oaks, even though they're closely related, they're doing different things fire resistance wise. But overall, seeing a lot of fire adaptation across the clade. And we conducted phylogenetic EM to detect if there were any unexpected shifts. We did not detect any. Now we can address those previous research questions. So will oak species that evolved within those same fire regime groups have similar fire resistant scores? And we can say that yes, we did see a difference between the fire regime groups and those fire resistant scores, with fire regime group 1 and 2 having higher fire resistant scores, given that again that exposure, that frequency interval of fire. But we also did see that fire regime group 5 had the same score as fire regime group 1. But again, Quercus bicolor is likely to explain for that, existing mostly in that fire regime group 5. And then secondly, will oak species share a suite of functional traits that relate to their fire resistance scores? And we did see that yes, overall in our scoring metric, the highest fire resistant scores were assigned to species that were tall trees, so had growth form of a tall tree, had bigger bark, and then as a result had a high degree of self-pruning. So some key takeaways from our study, we were able to utilize that functional trait ranking and be able to map the species fire resistance across space. We provide further evidence that fire acts as a strong environmental selection force, that the clade of Quercus is very fire adapted, and just across the clade in general, fire resistant traits are selected for in the environment in which they reside in. And that's maybe not surprising. We found based that most oaks are occurring within that fire regime group 1. So we had a strong portion of our that 1% study area selection that exists within fire regime group 1 that had that frequency of fire of 0 to 35 years, that low to mixed severity. Thus, the environment has been selecting for fire resistant traits given this exposure. We did see that our fire resistance scores varied by, again, those fire regime groups in which they occurred in, as well as the fire return intervals that they were within. And then lastly, we do see that shrub species did receive lower scores compared to tree growth form species. And this, again, is just due to the fact that shrubs are more conducive with the strategy of being fire embracers. So again, they focus more on that below ground survival of storage tissues, and being able to set up resprouts, set up those basal resprouts if fire is to come through and kill above ground biomass tissue. So not as conducive with a fire resistant trade strategy. So I just lastly wanted to end off my discussion today talking about some future applications of this work and some different avenues to go down. So we could continue to develop a standardized protocol to assign plant species and fire resistant score. So I think this just would be useful overall in management practice to be able to quantify the community in which you are working with, to be able to see what traits do the species possess that would yield high fire resistance to be able to survive fire. As I've alluded to, grouping species by growth form. So we did analyze this within our study, but maybe by separating the shrub from the tree growth form, but maybe this needs to be done in another way. So analyzing a shrub species based on those fire embracing trait strategies, and then so making a fire embracing score versus the tree growth form having that fire resistant score. So again, it's not that shrubs are not able to survive fire. It's just they have different strategies that are not consistent with that fire resistance. So further work to be conducted with this. And then lastly, the fire resistance score methodology, updated, integrated, depending on the ecosystem that you're conducting your research in. So you can add in traits, take out traits, and kind of make this applicable to different areas. Another application would be doing this at a smaller scale. So I obviously do mine at a large spatial scale, but it would be interesting as a management tactic again to go in and do this on a more community scale level and go into a community and be able to see the fire resistant scores or the fire resistant traits rather that species possess, be able to see what that overall community would look like in fires to come through. So at this time, I'd like to give some thanks and acknowledgements to the Minnesota State University Mankato Department of Biological Sciences, as well as the MSU Research Faculty Grant, the Radical Herbarium, UC Davis Arboretum, as well as Morton Arboretum, and the Bonapars for funding this research. Great thanks to my advisor, Dr. Matthew Paproff, as well as my committee members, Dr. Philip Larson and Dr. Christopher Rulin, Dr. Faye Young for GIS help. Big thank you to Paproff Lab, members, Gene Pengra and Church for all the support and help. And then thank you to my friends and family, as well as myself, Jimmy. And if you have any comments or questions, feel free to email me at Selee at mnsu.edu or my advisor, Dr. Matthew Paproff at mnsu.edu. Thank you.